Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cougar Dash. I am your host, Ryan Root, followed by Cody Schoeler. And we have a little bit to talk about with WSU football now that men and women's basketball is just finished up. Honestly, not a whole lot of great things to talk about with football, but we'll just start off, Cody, talking about Jayden de Laura's ongoing suspension and how he will not be playing in spring camp this year. So, care to maybe give your initial thoughts on that so far?
Mm-hmm. I mean, when all this stuff with him started and, suspended indefinitely was thrown out in kind of a lot of normal buzzwords, I was more of the it's not a big deal type on that side. Just, that happens. The dude's a freshman. He makes mistakes. If it was really bad, he would be gone from the program. I think people are going to go back to freaking out because of this. I still am on the side of let's not worry about it until something really happens. I think he's just I think he's maybe got to figure some stuff out. I think maybe Rolovich is just trying to take a hard stand on guys making mistakes, kind of having his first big disciplinary moment and having to set kind of his standards going forward. But I'm really not all that concerned. I think that if he still is the one that's going to win the job and has the most talent and plays the best, and whenever he gets back out there, he'll still he can still take that job. Whatever he misses out at this time could impact him, but he was the guy for whatever that weird season we had was. And I, as much as I do think that it's still back open and that he didn't, lock it up 100%, I still think that he's the front runner. So while it sucks that, he's not at the start of spring camp and, what Rolovich said, I still, I'm not going to overreact and start freaking out and think that Jayden de Laura is off the team and he's gone forever.
Yeah, and feel free to put in the comments, folks, what you guys think about Jayden de Laura's ongoing suspension. But I'm kind of on a similar boat, but I'm also on a boat of I'm glad that he's serving at least some punishment, at least somewhat. The fact that he's not going to return for spring camp, I think, is a considerable punishment that's kind of adding on to this of, he played this last, I don't know if we even really want to call it a season. I guess we'll call it a Pac-12 demo reel, but, he played the 4 games, 85-90% of the snaps at quarterback if he wasn't getting subbed out, but he has that year under his belt. So I bet you at least a little bit of him thought, this is my job going into next year as well. And now that he's not coming into spring camp and we got the guy from Tennessee coming in, Rolovich, went out and got Garantano? Is that how you pronounce his last name? Or
yeah, Guarantano.
Went out and got Guarantano. He must see something in Guarantano, and de Laura's still having to sit on the sidelines. Gunnar Cruz goes to Arizona. Cameron Cooper, I believe, entered the transfer portal as well, or
I think
he might still be on the team.
No, he's still there. He's still there. Okay, so lost one of your backup quarterbacks. So, and they brought in a guy from another quarterback that I'm trying to think of. But Xavier Ward, true freshman.
So there's more people. There's going to be another quarterback competition. I think it's just simple as that. And de Laura's already off to a rough start, even with the previous season that he had. So, let me ask you, what do you have him ranked in terms of? It's extremely early to tell as of right now, but is it still, is it still going to be his job next season, do you think?
I think, I would have to kind of figure out when he gets back. I assume that, my guess is that he'll play in the spring game. Maybe I think that Rolovich will want to have him back by then. I don't expect him to miss, everything in spring and be back in the summer. So that, but obviously if he does, then I think that's a big indictment on him. But honestly, I think if I was, having to handicap it, I'd still put him as a favorite just because, we saw him get it over one of the guys he's competing with already. And you've got Guarantano, who is incredibly talented, but you only transferred from the SEC to WSU if things aren't working out for you. So it's not like, he's some incredible transfer that has been killing it. He has his difficulties, and Xavier Ward, is a true freshman. It obviously stopped a little last year, but I think that there might be a little more competition and stuff preventing him this year. So I'd probably still have de Laura leading the way. And then, obviously that doesn't account for if he has any other future problems, if he, gets in trouble again, or, whether it's just team rules or whatever, so that's obviously not accounting for that. But in terms of just, talent and play, I think I'd still have him as a favorite. But, I think after a few weeks of practice, then we'll definitely have to dive into this big time and spend a lot of time on it, because, once again, it seems like every year the quarterback is up for grabs.
I, for one, kind of disagree. I think de Laura is in second place now behind Gorentano, even though we haven't even seen Gorentano take a snap in spring football yet. And that it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of Cougar fans watching spring football, especially this year, knowing that you're going to see all the other quarterbacks except for the starting quarterback from the previous season. I understand that a lot of Tennessee fans are not fond of Gorentano at all. He doesn't have a lot of momentum coming into Pullman, but considering he played against SEC opponents, and that's something that Jayden de Laura can't say. That's something that Cam Cooper can't say. It's something that Ward can't say. I forgot his last name. Yeah,
Xavier Ward.
Xavier Ward. That's something that he can't say either. The fact that Rolovich went out and got this guy. He's another veteran quarterback to bring the Pullman. So who knows if we're going to get another one-off quarterback, just when we thought we were finally going to have a year in, year out quarterback. But we may go down that same path with Gorentano. And as far as right now, with de Laura not being able to play in spring camp, I think Gorentano's got the edge just with his experience playing in the SEC, coming over to WSU, and already a rocky situation as an entire football program as going on right now. I think he might have a little bit of momentum behind him in that regard, but not in terms of the Tennessee fan base, because they absolutely just despise the guy. It looks like. But,
I'm glad you feel that way, because what are you, rocking an offer when it comes to anything regarding quarterbacks? So if you keep that up, then I guess once again I'll be right. But if you want to pick somebody else, go for it, because you have a way of just getting that wrong. So. Looks like we can rule out Gorentano already.
We will have to see. I'm going to definitely tune into spring football to see if I can finally get one right. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting regardless to see what turns out. But we could talk a little bit about the transfer portal situation for WSU, because it seems like it's just one person after another. I'm looking at a list of several different players here that entered the portal. Most recently, Ayden Hector, who was a 4-star recruit that was removed from Stanford football teams amidst some, I believe, some sexual assault allegations, and played with us for a year. He goes back into the portal. Cassidy Woods, Roderick Fisher, a 4-star receiver, Jameer Calvin, 4-star receiver. List keeps going. It's kind of brutal to see all the people leaving WSU. What loss do you think means the most to this program?
Yeah, and if we're looking at kind of the guys who have left after this season, because obviously we had some, they had some leave in the fall and even during the season. So you're looking at, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 guys probably that left after the season that played significant role, or that played some sort of roles. And so if I'm looking at that, I'm probably going to go with Jameer Calvin. In terms of the starters that are leaving, I think there's only a few. Obviously, I want to shout out Blake Mazza, who is leaving just, to be a little bit closer to home. And obviously, he is the best individual player that entered the portal, but at the end of the day, he's a kicker. And as much as I love, the specialists, and as much as I love Blake Mazza, I'm never going to lose sleep over a kicker or a punter leaving the team, because somebody else will come in, maybe not do it as well, but there won't be as big of a drop-off. But I'm going to go with Jameer Calvin for a few reasons. One, just being that, he was a starting receiver last year, and he was probably going to have at least a decent claim to that again this year. Obviously coming back from such a long time off with injury and then having such a weird season, but he looked really good in that last game, and he kind of started to maybe figure it out. I mean, they only played 4 games, so, think about it. The 4th game in a normal season is usually the first conference game. I mean, that is nothing. If it takes 4 games to figure it out, you still got, 9, 8 more games. So, I think that's huge. And obviously receiving core was, other than the offensive line and obviously the run game was huge last year, but the receiving core was one of the strengths of this team, and certainly helped Jayden de Laura as a true freshman, and was going to help whoever was this year is going to get their first reps on this team, or de Laura again getting his really extended freshman year. So just losing a veteran in that group is going to be tough. He was a guy who I assume was, a leader not only in the group but on the team. He'd been around longer than most guys. And he's been through a lot. So, I wish him best of luck. And obviously, anytime there's a new coach, guys are going to leave. But it'll be interesting to see who replaces him, because the outside group especially is a little rough and there's not a lot of guys. So that could be a huge blow.
For sure in the receiver department, it seems, Cassidy Woods left for kind of some non-football reasons, and Tay Martin, you can kind of argue a little bit both ways, but what was that?
He left to be closer to home too. He said that was a lot of guys did that this past year, and you can't really blame him for that. But yeah,
and Roderick Fisher, I think, is also a huge loss, considering they didn't use him a whole lot, and considering he's one of the few 4-star recruits that WSU has in recent memory.
Same with
that
Calvin.
Certainly hurts. Yeah,
they're 2
same
of
with
the
Calvin.
only ones.
John Bledsoe leaving. I think he just got here because of Daddy, but no longer for him. But as much as I'd like to say Gunnar Cruz hurts, I don't think he had too much of a foundation to
maybe hurts you. Yeah, hurts you personally, but
hurts me personally.
I don't think he's a huge loss necessarily for the team.
No, I'm really rooting for Arizona to give him a shot and see if he can take them to new heights, because I'm saying I think he could really make a difference for a football team, just not the Cougs. But another thing that sticks out to me is the veterans on the defensive side all leaving. Will Rogers III going to Temple, and Tyrese Ross and Skylar Thomas leaving were obviously big veterans to lose on defense as well. For a team that went from such a pitiful defensive season, not this last year, well, I guess you could say this last year, but the year before getting Coach Dickert, losing those veterans and still remaining young on the defensive side of the ball with a going into year 2 defensive coordinator, is going to be a huge difference. It's going to be, you're not going to have that veteran presence really on defense. And with all of the new freshmen coming in, I know there's what's his face from Nevada who's coming in as a safety.
Jayden Hicks.
Yes.
Something like that. Jayden, something like that. Hicks.
Yeah, but his last name Hicks, though. I believe you're right. Yeah. Young people on the defensive side of the ball with a second-year defensive coordinator and no veterans, that's going to be very pitiful for WSU going into the next season. So, I'd argue Ayden Hector is probably one of the biggest losses that this team's gone through. The fact that WSU even had the opportunity to have him on the roster was kind of fortunate for this defense to progress. And Hector in that Oregon game was insane. Everyone saw the potential that Hector had in that Oregon game, getting 3 turnovers and 3 straight possessions, I want to say, right? So it's insane, but it wasn't going to work out. It wasn't meant to be. And now WSU is, 1 step forward, 2 steps backwards yet again. But do you see that sort of same thing with the receiving core? Because even with a run and shoot offense, although Borgie is still on that roster, losing all those receivers, do you think it's the same thing with that core, losing all those veteran players?
I think the receiving core is built to kind of withstand that a little bit more. obviously Travell Harris and Renard Bell are still going to be there, and they were the two most productive guys, not only on the team, but in the conference. And so having, those two guys there, and then, like I said, it's a little kind of sparse in some of those other positions, but they do have a lot of bodies. And, this freshman or recruiting class, they brought in a lot of bodies. I like that CJ Moore transfer from Oklahoma State and then JUCO. I think he could be a guy to step up out there. Obviously, Calvin Jackson Jr. is still around. But one thing I do want to mention about these transfer portal guys is, most of them that we've mentioned, Fisher and Calvin and, Hector and Tyrese Ross, they still could come back. They've entered the portal, but guys can enter and come back. The ones, the Gunnar Cruzes and the guys that have committed somewhere, they're good and gone. But, we're expecting them to leave. I don't know the stats, but I assume that most guys that do enter the portal do end up leaving. But, it's not, out of the question that these guys come back. I think Ayden Hector, I think there's a shot because maybe he just tries to kind of reopen like a recruiting process. And then Roderick Fisher, I don't know everything that is surrounding him in terms of personal issues and stuff like that. I know he got into a little bit of trouble, but that's a guy who left before Rolovich even got here. And so he's still hanging out in the portal. So if he's good to go and if he doesn't have any lingering issues, that could be a guy that comes back. I don't know what the dialogue there is, but, maybe a guy or two comes back, maybe not. And, maybe they go and get some more guys in the transfer portal. They've got a handful, I think 3 or 4 right now that look like they may play some pretty big roles. So, they're definitely not done with that transfer portal yet, hopefully in a good way. Hopefully more guys don't leave. But it wouldn't shock me to see, more guys leave or guys come back or more guys come in or whatever. I just think, we're start of April. We still got a long ways to go before the season starts.
For sure, I don't think the transfer process with all of the excess players, if you will, is over. I think there's probably going to be a handful of other players to at least enter, like you said, could still come back if they're not picked up or if they haven't agreed to an offer somewhere else. But I don't think WSU is done, trimming the fat, if you will. It's not been a very fortunate past. Really just this whole season for WSU football has just been kind of a punch to the gut to Cougar fans. And that kind of brings us into our last topic of talking about the ceiling for WSU next season. I know at the beginning of this season, heading into what was supposed to be a 6-game with a to be announced 7th game season, and WSU ends up playing 4 games, winning just one of them. I know at the beginning of this season, we were thinking, 4-3 could be a solid floor to go off of. This team can upset opponents here and there. Now, at the end of that season, notable losses, frustrated coaching staff, DUI, starting quarterback. There's a lot of things going wrong. I could give you my prediction, at least first, judging off of next season, if there is a how many games are in a regular season? It's like 11, 12.
3 non-conference, 9 conference. Yeah. So
going off of a hopefully a 12-game season next year, I haven't seen the schedule by any means. I wouldn't even put this team to sweep the non-conference schedule. I think they could win at least one of them, hopefully 2, but I don't think they could sweep the non-conference schedule depending on who they play. And that being said, I could picture probably for a ceiling, it's still less than 500. I'd still put them 6 wins for a ceiling.
6 and 6. Yeah, I think ceiling is like barely sneaking into some crappy bowl game, 6 and 6. But yeah, non-conference, I believe they play Utah State, and then they have some FCS opponent, and then they play BYU later in the year. So they're all winnable games, but, they can definitely drop.
Maybe not necessarily BYU. That might be.
They'll be a little bit worse than they were last year, obviously losing Zach Wilson, but they're still formidable. But, maybe WSU figures it out by then because they do play later in the season. And then conference, obviously, it's going to be tough. There's not going to be really any game that you're going to be able to look at and, write in pen for a win. I believe they do play Arizona. Like you said, get maybe a Gunner Cruz matchup. So, if Arizona is the same team they were last year, obviously they have a lot of changes going on. That could be winnable. But, I think they probably finish 5-7 at best, if not a little bit below that, depending on the non-conference games. That Utah State game, I think, should be a win, but, they were good a few years ago. But yeah, 5-7. Maybe get 6-6 and sneak in. But yeah, I'm not really expecting much because it's what we said before last season. We said go 500, and that was a different schedule. But this is extended year one. This is going to be Nick Rolovich's first year to fully establish, who he is as a coach and who this team is. Not only did they only play 4 games, but multiple COVID pauses, cancellations, on the field getting ready for a game, and just so much other stuff going on that would make it, impossible for a coach in his first year at a program to do anything, especially a fairly young team. So, I think most of the benchmarks for this team are going to come in the quote unquote moral victories. If the defense can keep up kind of some of the ways they were trending last year, good against the run, getting a little bit more pressure, those are going to be things to watch. And then whoever happens to be quarterback, if it's a guy who can maybe, set it up for the future, like a de Laura or a Ward or maybe even a Cooper, that'll be huge. But, I'm not expecting a lot of wins. I don't think anybody should. Just about any win they get is going, take that for what it's worth, and be happy that they're getting them. But this also isn't a team that's going to go, win only 2 games. They have a little bit of a higher floor than that.
There's a handful of teams I think that are, not necessarily a guaranteed wins, but most likely could be wins. I'm looking at Oregon State, Stanford, Arizona, maybe even Cal. I think could be favorites in those situations, depending on where we play. Considering that, do you know if the canceled games were supposed to be we were supposed to play Cal at home? So are we supposed to be playing them on the road this year, even though the game was canceled?
I'm not sure if they are using those because I know they play at Utah, which they obviously played at last year. They do play at Cal. So I believe they're the ones that were scheduled. They're, using those at like they were and flipping those, other than the Utah ones. So they get Utah State, Portland State, USC at home to start it out. Then, but later they've got Oregon State, Stanford, BYU, and then second to last season they've got Arizona at home. So those are the home games. And the home schedule other than USC is really favorable, with Arizona, Stanford, the more winnable games coming at home. On the road, I don't know if they win a road game with Oregon, Arizona State, Cal, and the other team. But those home games at least will be winnable. So at least the games that they do win, hopefully, a select amount of fans will at least get to see those in person.
I think for sure all eyes are going to be on Rolovich from this point on. They kind of all were to start out this season, had a ton of momentum coming into the year with a lot of community support. But if you ask me, I think a lot of the struggles that WSU went through during last season, not even just this offseason, but just during the regular season, Rolovich had definitely a ton of questionable moments, and some of those really hurt WSU. And going off of, I think a lot of his sort of like welcoming party has kind of gone away now. Now Rolovich is. I think he kind of understands he's now here to coach football and not be like a Pullman celebrity at this point, So going into this season with very much so a underdog going into the conference schedule. We're right there with Arizona, I would say, to be in the bottom quarter of the conference, there's going to be a ton of eyes on Rolovich to see if he can at least win, 3-4 conference games, or he can win, or he could possibly win an Apple Cup. Like I said at the beginning of this year, going into this year, even if the Cougars lose all of their games, but they end up winning the Apple Cup, then Rolovich, okay, you're back kind of level from there. I think you're kind of in the red right now going into the season and kind of having to dig your way out of a hole. But if you somehow squeeze an Apple Cup out, I mean, you could just, that could be your only win. It could bring you back to level. So if you have wins behind you on there, then you're in the green at that point. But with all dreams aside, in terms of just the ceiling, it's not going to be like going into last year where we thought this could be an above 500 team. This with all the notable losses, all of the coaching frustrations, it's gonna be a nitty gritty season to kind of iron out some of the wrinkles, and it's gonna be painful to see, especially in this past decade or so with Cougar football. But going into the Rolovich era, if he's going to prove that this is his team, this is his culture of football going into this next season, he's got to put his coaching chops on.
Yeah, I will say that being somebody who covered the team and got to listen to a bunch of Nick Rolovich press conferences, I do think that off the field, he's done everything right. I think he had a little issue at one point almost a year ago, but he's taken responsibility when things have gone bad. He's endeared himself to the community and won over fans without any fans even being there to watch him. And so if you're looking at a coach as like a developmental type of prospect, where you see a football player that has the athleticism and has all the capability and just hasn't put it together yet, I think Rolovich has that. I think that he has the foundation of being a good coach, because I think he handles it correctly, and I think Leach was a great X's and O's and on the field coach, but he did a lot of questionable things outside of that. Rolovich won't do that. So I think the potential for him to really put it together and be a great coach is there. Now, obviously, we're going to have to see him do it on the field. And, I don't want to hold a lot of that last season against him because I think he was put in an impossible situation. But if he struggles this year, then, I think that's the start of, some concerns. But, I expect him to go out there and have his stuff figured out. I mean, he didn't get a spring game last year. This is the first time he's getting a spring game. So, I think this is his chance, like you said, to really make something of himself. And I believe that he'll do it. I don't know if it will translate necessarily to wins, but I don't think it'll translate to blowouts and some of the performances that we saw last year. I think this will be a more competitive team at the very least.
For sure. And at the very least, Cougar football fans can say Borghi will be back. So we could just hope for that. Abe Lucas will be back. Yeah. Borghi will have his final run as a Coug before.
Maybe. He could come back again.
Maybe. That is right. I keep forgetting about the COVID year of eligibility. So he definitely needs to build up his demo reel a little bit.
Plus he has,
going into the draft.
Plus, he has a red shirt, so even if there wasn't COVID eligibility, he could have burned his red shirt last year. So I don't think he'll be back. He won't be back for 2 years or whatever. But he can come back. I'm not expecting it, but 12 games of Borghi will at least be very nice to watch.
Yes, hopefully. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But that is all the time that we have for Cougar Dash. You can find all of our written content exclusively on sportspac12.com, and you can follow them on Twitter at sportspac12. You can find links to that written content on our website, dashsports.tv, and make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at dashsportstv. Lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dash Sports, where you can find all of our shows and clips. We'll be tuning in at the same time next week, 1 p.m. on Thursdays. Thank you, and as always, go Cougs.